Jake, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
James, what's going on, brother? Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our mutual friend, Dustin, who I had the pleasure of sitting down and chatting with him, who's a very high performance entrepreneur, he highly recommended you to get in touch with you. But can you share your story, mate? So you're an entrepreneur. You've been in the game for a long time, but how did you start, mate? Talk to me about your journey.
Yeah, so my background is actually in the healthcare technology space. So I started a company with a couple of other guys around 2014, 2015, and that company grew very rapidly. We went from nothing to over 30 employees in about 18 months, so some really rapid growth. Um, and as many people have experienced, I ended up burning myself out. And I was, despite having achieved what I set out to and accomplishing an incredible amount, I felt very unhappy, very empty, and very unfulfilled. And so this kind of sent me on this journey of soul searching, if you will, and had me really start to invest in my interpersonal work and my self growth to determine, like, why do I feel the way that I do despite achieving so much, right? Despite accomplishing some pretty incredible goals that I had for myself for a number of years. And simultaneously, here I am, working with the other co-founders of the organization and becoming very keenly aware that people don't have business challenges. They just have personal challenges that show up in their business. And so, of course, in recognizing that, I was like, this is what people actually need help with. This is what people really need support with. They need support in overcoming and breaking through, right, the inner barriers within us, the unconscious blind spots that we all have that prevent them from being not only more successful, but also more fulfilled and happier.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So talk to me about entrepreneurship. Like how did you feel like that, because there's so many different directions we can go in
Of
life.
course.
Most people sort of live the boring, mundane
Yep.
9 to 5. We're very much programmed to go to school. Then after that, we get into university, and then we get a job, and then we work throughout our younger years all the way through into our 60s.
Yep.
But was there a pivotal moment where you said, I can achieve more and get a lot more out of life that's more fulfilling?
Yes and no. It was more, I mean, because the best way that we learn is by contrast, right? Is experiencing something and then realizing for myself that I want something more or something different. And so for me, when I left the healthcare technology space, I got clear on two very specific things, which was I want to work for myself, right? So I don't want to have to answer to anyone else. And I want to be able to work from anywhere. This was back in early 2018. So this is 7 years ago now. And the laptop lifestyle was very much this kind of new-ish, thing. And this fad that was preached about online and that so many people were rightfully attracted to because of the freedom that it displayed. And so I got very clear very quickly that this is what I want for myself, for my life. And I mean, when it comes to creating anything or accomplishing a goal, specificity is the first step. It's getting clear and highly specific around what I want and then becoming unavailable for anything that is not that. So for me, that was kind of how I decided going into entrepreneurship, at least for myself, was the path that I wanted to go down.
Yes. And what have you found different about entrepreneurship? Like, what have you learnt just on your whole entire journey?
Well, I mean, the cruel irony for a lot of entrepreneurs, in fact, is that, you know, they got into entrepreneurship for the sake of freedom, and yet they take less time off than ever before, So,
Yes.
so trust me, like there's an underbelly to everything, including entrepreneurship, right? Where you're responsible for it all. So I don't want to make entrepreneurship sound incredibly glamorous because it's quite frankly, it's not. Um, in fact, a lot of studies show that I think over 74% of entrepreneurs suffer from some type of mental illness. Um,
Really?
yeah,
Well,
the numbers are quite frankly staggering, and that's not to discourage anyone from pursuing entrepreneurship, because there is an incredible amount of freedom, flexibility that is available to you if you stick with it, if you don't give up, and if you are successful. And obviously the only way that, you're not going to be successful is if you don't put in the required amount of work, or if you give up too soon. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make is they design their lifestyle around their business as opposed to the other way around. The beautiful thing about entrepreneurship that so many people miss, quite frankly, and I know this because I support a lot of men who are in this position, right, where they went into entrepreneurship for the sake of freedom, right, but they can't bring themselves to take a vacation or take time off. And so I'm always encouraging entrepreneurs to build their business around their lifestyle, right? Because isn't that
yes.
why we got into entrepreneurship in the first place, right? It was for what? It was for freedom. It wasn't to be chained to a desk to, work a 9 to 5. And so that's kind of my approach with my clients, especially when it comes to analyzing their hobbies. Because most entrepreneurs, when I speak to them and when they're willing to be honest with both me and themselves, they don't have any hobbies. They might work out, they might have some sort of fitness regimen, but I don't think fitness is really a hobby. I think it's kind of like showering or brushing your teeth. At least that's how I think of it, is that it's got to be a necessary part of life and living and pursuing a healthy life. But beyond that, most entrepreneurs, they're addicted to work.
Yes. Jake, did you hear Dana White, UFC president, in an interview once? He talked about the idea of entrepreneurship, and what most people mistakenly think is that you'll have a lot more freedom, which you do. That's correct. But he remembers the grind. He remembers not taking any days off, no Christmas, no Easter. In America, obviously, they celebrate Thanksgiving. No public holidays
Sure.
whatsoever. It was just non-stop work. But I remember chatting to my cousin. So my cousin is a high-performance entrepreneur as well, very, very successful, multi-millionaire. His name's Dane McDonald. He owns Clean Health Fitness Institute.
Okay.
And I talked to him on my podcast, and he was saying he doesn't take any days off, but he loves it. He loves the grind. It's a slow and steady progression,
Sure.
but he just absolutely loves it. And he wouldn't be doing it if he didn't wake up with a heart on every day for it. And I'm guessing that initially that's that spark that you need, isn't it? So when you do dive into entrepreneurship, you've got to be all in, don't you?
Not necessarily. I kind of disagree with Dana's sentiment. And here's why. I think asking ourselves whether or not we love something is kind of a shallow question. I think the deeper question is, why do you love it? So I
Mm,
think you mentioned your cousin, for example, right? Who's a high performance entrepreneur. It's like, okay, great. You love it, but why do you love it? Right. And the reason that that question is so important is because it illuminates the unconscious motivation beneath the conscious behavior. Why does that matter? Because our conscious mind is connected to what we know, but our unconscious mind is a reflection of who we really are and who we've become up until that point in our lives. You probably have heard this before, that what, 90 to 95% of our behavior is dictated by what? It's dictated by our unconscious mind, right?
yes.
So when you think about that, free will for most men is an illusion, right? What we have is our conditioning and its consequences, right? I've worked with and I've coached many high successful multimillionaires, 7-figure businesses, 8-figure businesses on up. And
Wow.
what I can tell you is that this is pretty much across the board, right? Is that their ambition is actually a proxy for something else,
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
right? 100%.
Yeah.
Something else is ultimately fueling their ambition to want to make a difference, have an impact, or be successful. It's never about the end goal, whatever the end goal is, right? it's always about something else, something deeper, something that is likely being hidden away in their unconscious mind by their ego so that they don't actually address it or confront it.
Wow.
What I have come to find is that, and I mean, you know this as someone who is in mixed martial arts. I grew up in mixed martial arts myself. I grew up in Taekwondo.
Oh,
You're
wow.
never fighting the person across from you. You're always fighting the man in the mirror.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
That's what's actually going on, right? So many men get into mixed martial arts, right? As an unconscious attempt to claim victory over what? Over their pain, right?
Yeah.
Their passion for mixed martial arts is just the external conscious manifestation of that. Here's the issue. Until you resolve the underlying unconscious pain, right? You're always going to be fighting something or someone, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be projecting that pain or manifesting that pain in a certain way and labeling it as what? Labeling it as passion or ambition.
Yeah. Isn't that fucking interesting, Jake? That's fascinating. I remember listening to a conversation with Alex Hormozy. I love Alex Hormozy. I think he's amazing. Him and his wife and what they've done. But I remember listening to Alex in a interview, and he was talking about trying to prove to his father that he was worth something.
Bingo.
I think his father was quite hard on
Yep.
him. And I think also you're right. I think a lot of high performance entrepreneurs or anyone that's in the space of creating a legacy or some sort of empowerment and inspiration and trying to help and change lives stems something, as you just said, from the unconscious mind. It's something deep within
Yep.
us. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Did that ever reflect your own sort of journey? Was there something about you, Jake,
Yeah.
that you had?
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
wrote an entire book about it, because in
Wow.
my own process of self-discovery, I grew up in sports. I was a three-sport athlete all through high school. I was highly successful as an entrepreneur in, the healthcare technology space. I've always been a driven, motivated, assertive, determined individual until I realized all of my ambition, my desire for success, for significance, to have like this incredibly powerful legacy, right? It's actually to claim victory over the pain that I experienced and the insecurity that stemmed from getting sexually abused growing up,
Oh,
right? Right. So there's this, it never fails. I've been doing this. I've served hundreds and hundreds of men at this point. And we're talking like direct one-on-one coaching that have come through our various programs. Excuse me. And what I can tell you is that men who are prone to push, 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 go, 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 do, 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 all of that is just an unconscious attempt to claim victory over their pain and their insecurities. So, like I mentioned, until they address that pain, until they address the source of those insecurities, they're going to accomplish really great things, but they're very, very likely to feel empty and unfulfilled. Why? Because your success will always feel incomplete and insufficient until you've reconciled your pain.
yeah, that's fascinating, Jake. Wow, that's so interesting. Because, yeah, you only look at the end product, don't you? It's kind of like that picture you might have seen, where you have the tip of the iceberg just submerging
Correct.
on top of the
Yep.
water, and then the rest of it is the large bulk of the ice that's underneath the ocean.
Correct.
You don't see all the grind, you don't see the hard work, the setbacks, the trauma, the obstacles, the adversity, and everything that they've overcome, to get to where they are. But it all stems from some sort of pain, doesn't it? As you just mentioned.
100%. I had one of my clients, very recently share something very similar to what Alex Hermosi mentioned, right? He had worked really hard to build a seven-figure business, and yet on some inherent level, he wasn't happy and he wasn't fulfilled, right? He thought he would be happy, he thought he would be fulfilled once he, achieved having a 7-figure business, right? And he got there and he actually felt, not only did he not feel those things, right? But he felt empty, right? And he felt very unfulfilled and dissatisfied. And then in our conversation together, as we're kind of, digging into his unconscious mind, right? So that we can optimize for things. He's like, "Oh, I'm realizing that, right, my ambition to build $1 million business was to prove my dad wrong." Right.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Some of the most successful people or famous people on the planet have had some sort of hardship. If you reflect, like Walt Disney,
Yeah.
who was a pioneer of imagination, who got fired for lacking imagination. Oprah Winfrey,
Yeah.
they told her that she was unfit for TV. Michael Jordan,
Yep.
he missed over 1,000 shots. And I think he also got cut from his high school basketball
Yeah.
team. Yeah, so
Yep.
it's just interesting that you hear about the lessons that or the hardship and the
Yep.
setbacks that a lot of these people that have gotten to where they are stems something from some sort of pain that has happened in the past.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
the goal,
yeah. Sorry.
well, and the goal of our ego, right, the self-protective part of our psyche that is specifically designed to maintain the status quo, it wants to hide that from us, right? It
Yeah.
wants to hide the pain from us. It wants to hide those insecurities from us. Why? Because there's discomfort there, right? A lot of uncomfortable emotions, right? And so it disguises our desires as ambition, right? So that we don't actually address the root cause issue because it's so inherently uncomfortable, right? So the best way for the ego to distract us, right, is to do what? It's to hide the truth from us, right? It's like, I love what I do, right? Well, why do you love it? Like, tell me more about that. Like, let's really dig into and unpack that, right? Because my guess is, and as you've spoken into a few times, my guess is that there's actually some pain that lives beneath that, that is currently serving as the fuel for that. The problem is, you could end up like me. You could accomplish everything that you set out to and check all of the boxes, right? You get the house, you get the car, you get the boat, you get the business, you get the wife, whatever it is, right? But how do you feel internally when you, right, when you lay your head down at night? Or do you just go back to chasing more or the next level, right? Because more only makes you want more, and the next level only makes you want the next level. So it's very empty when you really think about it, right? Unconscious enslavement in many ways, especially for men nowadays, looks like constantly needing to be a better version of yourself. Because what's the underlying
Mm,
unconscious motivation beneath that? It's, I'm not enough as I am, right? So they become addicted to self improvement or self betterment, right? Which we look at and we reward, right? And by we, I mean society, right? We look at that and we're like, you know, look at him. He's such a hard worker and he's so ambitious and he's so driven and motivated and, he's all about self improvement, right? And so we applaud that and it's rewarded. But
yes.
what's actually the driver for it? It's pain. It's
Mm.
wounding.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Such an interesting topic, Jake. And yeah, you just see you don't see the underlying surface. You just see the end product.
Correct. Because, think about how many highly successful people have unfortunately, right, taken their lives, you know,
Yeah, that's true.
right? Anthony Bourdain, arguably the biggest food celebrity influencer in the world, right? Kate Spade, she was making $50 million a month. Robin Williams, one of the most beloved actors of all time, had won multiple Academy Awards. at one point in time was the highest paid actor in Hollywood. When you start to dig into the personal lives of these highly successful people, especially entrepreneurs, appearances are not what they seem. You find out very quickly that so many of them are personally incredibly unhappy. Their relationships are anything but thriving. Many of them are on the verge of divorce. They don't have a very close connected relationship with their children, and they really struggle to be present.
Yeah.
So many men are driven to the degree that they struggle to be present. Why? Because when we're present, we're forced to be with our pain.
Yes. Jake, do you feel that men right now are a little bit of in a predicament? So I'm currently writing a book. I've been secretly writing a book for the last year
Awesome.
about the mating crisis.
Okay.
So I go into
Yeah.
details about the current dating scene on men and women,
Yep.
intersexual dynamics. I talk about the red pill. I talk about
Sure.
things like education and employment. I go into the Me Too movement.
Yep.
I go into some pretty incredible stats, like men between the ages of 18 to 30 haven't had sex in the last
Wow.
year. But more so, I go into a little bit of masculinity, and I talk
Sure.
about a lot of men, how they don't feel needed.
Yeah.
And a lot of men just don't feel wanted, because I think women have obviously done exceptionally well in the workforce, and they should have always had the rights that they should have always had. But
Yep.
now that women are just outpacing men, men are just retreating. They're just saying, fuck this.
Yeah.
I don't feel needed anymore.
Yeah.
And then, you were talking about a lot of these entrepreneurs that they have this hidden pain. They have this pain behind the closed doors.
Yep.
But what are some of the things that you work with, especially with these CEOs? Because if I remember correctly, you've worked with CEOs and a lot of high performance
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. What are some of the things that you've discovered about your clients?
Oh man, great question. Here's what I will say. All growth as a man begins with the question, what have you been doing with your pain? Because you are correct. There's two primary camps, it seems, in the world of men today, right? You have a lot of men who are overweight, out of shape, and they're addicted to porn. They drink too much. They
Yep.
smoke weed, play video games, right? They're overly feminized, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have this other camp of men who are addicted to work, making money. They're addicted to like achieving peak physical fitness. Excuse me. They're addicted to looking good, right? And their image, they're addicted to having it like all together, right? Or showing, right, that they have it all together. Here's the issue. Both of those men are overcompensating. They're just overcompensating in opposite directions.
Yes.
Now, don't get me wrong, right? Are there more positive side effects to being addicted to making money, working out, and trying to achieve peak physical fitness, as opposed to like watching porn and drinking or smoking weed? Of course, right? But at the end of the day, right, they're all still coping mechanisms. And a coping mechanism, by definition, is in an attempt to solve for pain. Right. And so the encouragement when it comes to the predominant sentiment, right, in the world of men's work today is get your shit together, right? Stop watching porn, stop drinking, stop playing video games, stop smoking weed, right? And go to the gym, right? Start saving money, eat healthy, et cetera, et cetera. But all that is, it's just creating a more socially approved version of the false self. The false self being who I think I need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful. It's who I think I am, but I'm not. Right? It's not the authentic me. It's not the true self. Right. And so really, all of this is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's all it is.
Yep.
Most of the coaching available to men today, it's teaching them how to cope.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's symptom reduction, right? That's really all it is. That's symptom reduction. Your physical fitness, right? It's just a byproduct of what? It's right, your perception of self, right? Well, you can go out and you can adopt new habits and patterns of behavior as it relates to your physical fitness, right? But your sense of self, your identity is still the same. So you're building on top of a faulty foundation, right? What we
Yes.
need to do is we need to work on transforming the person, right? The spirit. Otherwise, and I mentioned this earlier, you can achieve extraordinary things and still be and experience a fundamental level of unhappiness, discontentment, and relational discontentment, right? You talked about the mating crisis nowadays. So much of that has to do with the fact that men are not being properly initiated into manhood.
True.
They're not being properly initiated into manhood, and they're stuck in this warrior phase of psychological development where it's all about becoming the best, highest version of myself. Don't get me wrong, that stage has a place and it serves a purpose. Right? There's nothing bad about it inherently. There isn't. But we were never meant to stay there
Mm.
because the warrior is pretty much all about themselves, right? And this is very congruent with the first half of life, right? Where the first half of life is all about self-actualization and individuation, right? It's all about making something of myself, right? And establishing oneself, right? That game has to fall apart if you are to transition over into the second half of life, which is all about transformation and transcendence. All of a sudden it becomes about your life becomes about being in service to a higher purpose and or a higher power, right? And when you think about a higher purpose, there are very few things that come to mind faster than the role of being a father, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
having kids changes your entire value system, or at least it should, you know,
That's so true.
because
Yep.
because if it doesn't and life continues to go on being all about you and your successes and your ambition and like the goals that you have for yourself, right? Then your kids are going to grow up to resent you, right? What ought to happen is you start to really pour into them. That's not to say you sacrifice your goals, right? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? But it becomes much more expansive whereby you're directing a lot of your focus and your energy towards raising them and instilling in them values and beliefs that are going to allow them to be, incredibly high contributing members of society.
Yeah. It's interesting, Jake. There was a 80-year Harvard study that talked about what makes people happy. And if I remember correctly, they followed these individuals for decades on decades. And they asked them, what were some of the things that made you happy?
Yeah.
And it was what you just touched on. It's having a high sense of self-worth and providing value and giving back,
100%.
leaving a legacy.
Yep.
And I reflect on some of the people that I admire. For example, Bruce Lee, one of my idols. I'm a martial artist. I've been doing it since I was
Yep.
6, and he was my idol. And what an incredible person he was, and the legacy that he left. And even today, some of his philosophy, I just think he was really ahead of his time. He really
Yeah.
was. But what an impact he made. And Princess Diana, she was another
Yep.
one. She obviously tragically, died many years ago, but what a legacy she made. Here she was the princess of a royal family, but you watched her. She would be out in the community. She
Yeah.
would be doing some incredible philanthropic things.
Yep.
And I think Tony Robbins talked about this as well, Jake. He said something like, the greater good is you need to be in acts of service, doing something that's greater than you. So he talks about not just the mind, the body, and the spirit, and then just evolving, but also creating and giving back,
Yep.
leaving a legacy.
Yep.
And you touched on children as
Yep.
well. Do you think that's what's missing with a lot of the entrepreneurs that you work with? Is they work for a specific goal for their own, but then the end product is, okay, why am I doing this? What is the goal? What is the end product? When I leave this
Yep.
earth, how do I want to be remembered? What is the legacy I want to leave?
Yep.
And how can I change the world in some part?
Well, I think it's important to understand that nothing outside of you can give you more of what you already have.
Yeah.
When you think about it, if you talk to any entrepreneur for long enough, you're like, why are you doing what you're doing? Right? It typically starts off superficial, right? I'm trying to build a 7-figure business or an 8-figure business, right? Or whatever it is. Right? Okay, so that you can do what? Well, so I can build my dream house, or so that I can retire my parents, or buy my mom a house, or provide a better life for my family, whatever it is. Buy land. Okay, so that you can what? How will that make you feel once you've done that? Well, I'll be happy. I will feel a sense of accomplishment. I'll be fulfilled. I'll feel at peace. But the reality is that that's already here. Joy is already here. Peace is already here. Abundance is already here. It's not out there. As long as we operate under the assumption that our peace, our joy, our happiness, our fulfillment is in the future, then we will continue to kick the can down the road when it comes to experiencing it, right? We're going to continue to outsource it to the future. So we'll always be chasing it, but never actually experiencing it. And this is why you have people like my client who build a very successful 7+ figure business, and they're like, why don't I feel joy, happiness, peace, fulfillment? If anything, I feel the opposite of that. I feel unfulfilled. I feel stressed. I feel anxious. I feel unhappy, empty. So much of our work, and this is not just as entrepreneurs, right? We all do this, but especially in the world of entrepreneurship, because we don't have the constraints when it comes to someone who works a normal 9 to 5 and receives the same paycheck every 2 weeks. When it comes to entrepreneurship, our earning ability is uncapped. So we determine how much money we make, right? Based on how hard we work, the value we provide, the programs, the services, the products that we build, create, and market and promote in the world, right? So it's very uncapped in that way. So for entrepreneurs, it's especially prevalent that we connect with the reality that what we're really after, right? Because we're all just chasing a feeling. That
Yeah.
feeling already exists right here, right now. Our goal is to address whatever internal barriers reside within us that stand against those things.
Yes. Happiness, I think, like any emotion, Jake, is fleeting. It comes and goes. But what do you think separates from materialism
Yep.
and what really makes people happy? Because if you think about this too, mate, when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about, fuck yeah, the Tesla that I bought or the $1 million house that I bought or
Of course not.
the nice watch or whatever materialistic thing.
Yeah.
You're going to be thinking about the memories. You're going to be thinking about the legacy that you created. You're going to be thinking
Yep.
about your children if you did have children. But what do you think happiness means to you? What really makes people happy?
I love that you pointed that out, right? Because happiness is very circumstantial, whereas joy is not, right? Joy is a cultivated way of being that supersedes circumstances, right? But that absolutely has to be cultivated. And I think the best way for us to cultivate joy is by focusing on the things that really matter, right? And you mentioned giving back, right? It's very counterintuitive, right? But it's so beautifully portrayed, in the Bible, for example, not to bring religion into the conversation, but the wisdom that is found in the scriptures is so beautiful, but very counterintuitive, right? And that is this: we give it away to keep it, We suffer to get well. We die to live.
Ah, wow. I love that.
It's very counterintuitive, and it flies right over the head of the ego, right? Of the false self, right? Because the false self is addicted. It's addicted to looking good, right? And so much of it is wrapped up in ambition or the desire to be highly successful and achieve, right? Now, redeeming our desires, right, is so important. And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't have goals. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a vision for the future that involves you achieving really great things, but it has to be bigger than you. And typically, what does that require? That requires, optimizing for your internal world. And the best way to do that is through self growth and healing. Otherwise, you're going to likely continue to find yourself achieving your goals, but not experiencing, the joy that you're hoping to experience.
Yeah. How does someone tap into that, Jake? So, someone that's probably listening to
Yep.
this, how does someone tap into that internal self where they might be high performance, they're achieving phenomenal
Yep.
success, but yet they feel empty?
Mhm.
What are some of the strategies and steps? Like when you're working with some of these incredible people
Yep.
that are very, very successful, but yet still feel
Yeah.
empty, how can they tap into that self?
So, one of the exercises that I use with my clients, whenever they come to me and they're in that position that you just described, right? They're highly successful, things are going great in business, and yet fundamentally they feel unhappy or unfulfilled, anxious, stressed, burnt out, overwhelmed. I have them write down like the 4 to 5 most painful moments in their life and how that made them feel, the prices that they continue to pay and the prices that other people pay as a result of the beliefs and the stories that they made up about themselves, other people, and the world as a result of the painful experience that happened to them. So then we start to work through and address the emotions that are still attached to these previous experiences, because when that happens, alchemy can actually occur. And by alchemy, I mean the work of turning pain into power, purpose, progress, etc. So they're no longer attaching these painful, uncomfortable emotions like guilt, shame, sadness, bitterness, resentment to these previous experiences. And now it's transformed into, for example, gratitude, because there is the recognition of how that painful experience made them stronger. For example, I'm incredibly grateful for my experience of sexual abuse. And that might sound incredibly ironic, but why am I so grateful for it? Because it gave me the gift of empathy. It gave me the gift of being able to serve my clients in such a powerful and impactful way that they're able to transform their lives, and I'm able to then pass on the value in a way that not only affects them, but also their kids, their friends, and their family.
Yeah. Yeah, Jake. I think that some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, the kindest, most benevolent people have, some sort of adversity and some sort of huge trauma or setback. I was wondering if it was okay with you, Jake. Can you go into your story about, how you were sexually abused and how that made you the person you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, I wrote a whole book about it, but it happened when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was at Christian summer camp, and I was essentially raped by an older camper. I was in, I would have been in middle school, and he was an older high schooler, so probably 5 years older than me, 4 or 5 years older than me, I imagine. So he probably would have been 16 or 17, and I was 12 or 13, right around there. And what added to the abuse was the fact that it had happened while I was sleeping in front of a bunch of other friends of mine, friends that I had grown up with, who I attended the same church with. And I woke up and all of them are laughing. And I was like, what's going on? Like, what happened? And, so they told me what happened. And I was filled with embarrassment, guilt, shame, anger towards my friends. Like, why didn't any of you try to stop it? Why didn't any of you intercede? Right. And so unconsciously, I started to, right, the way that I dealt with the pain from that experience was I didn't deal with it, right? I just repressed it.
Suppress, yeah.
But as a result, the way that I coped was I started to act as if. I started to act as if I had it all together. I started to act as if I was successful. I started to become, fixated on how I looked and my physical fitness and building muscle and getting stronger, right? So from the outside looking in, if you looked at me, you would think, oh, Jake's got his life all together, right? And in many ways, I did externally, right? But intrinsically, internally, right, I was still carrying around the pain from that incident, right? I was dancing around the pain, right? Or performing my way over top of it, right? And so, of course, because I didn't have any resolution there, right, that started to affect my relationships later on in life. It started to affect my work, right, and my ability to be successful at work because I was scared that that pain would happen again, that someone would again try to take advantage of me, right? So my ability to trust other people, let other people in, see me, be vulnerable, all of that was very compromised, if you will. And so it caused a lot of interpersonal issues that I was, of course, like, what's going on here? You know, why am I continuing to deal with these issues? Right. For example, why am I continuing to kind of repeat the same pattern across romantic relationships with women, right? I'm kind of common denominator here. We get to a certain point in the relationship and I run and I'm not exactly sure why I'm running. And then it's like, oh, I have a fear of intimacy. Well, where does that fear come from? Oh, that fear comes from the fact that, I was sexually abused when I was 12 and now I'm, 26, 27, right? And I'm just playing that fear out in the context of my romantic relationships. I'm just unaware of it, right? I
Yeah.
became aware of it because I went to therapy because I was like, I need to figure out what's going on here. You know, I've, done this 3 times across 3 different romantic relationships and I need to figure out what's going on, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jake. I've spoken to a lot of people actually that sort of specialize in human emotions and attachment styles.
Right.
Addressing the nervous system because a lot of this stems from childhood or inner wounds. It's interesting when you were touching on relationships. Some people will even sabotage a good
Yeah.
relationship that's
Yep.
healthy, that has a lot of green flags
Yep.
because they have past trauma, like an individual that might have been hurt from previous relationships or just goes from one toxic relationship to the
Yep.
next. Eventually, they find someone that treats them
Yep.
well, treats them with kindness, treats them as how a human being should be
Yep.
treated, and yet it just feels unfamiliar. It's unfamiliar territory, and they will sabotage that and run away from it. And it just is a vicious cycle that a lot of people don't really know how to do. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Well, their nervous system is attracted to chaos.
Yep.
So the moment, as you alluded to, the moment they find themselves in a healthy relationship where they have nothing to worry about, right? There is no chaos, right? There's the opposite of chaos. There's calm. That feels like a threat to their nervous system. And so what's the best way to deal with a threat? Well, typically it's to run away from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
Yep.
can fight it, but obviously that only goes so far, especially in terms of a romantic relationship, right? Eventually, if fighting the other person, right? And in this case, I mean pushing the other person or unconsciously pushing the other person away, right? If that doesn't work, what are you going to do? You're going to go to flight and then you're going to run.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Such an interesting topic, Jake. So with your clients, Jake, and your program,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you incorporate? So do you incorporate meditation,
Yep.
mindfulness, journaling? What are some of the practices that you incorporate to help their busy schedule? What are some of the things that you implement?
Yeah. So one of my core programs, for example, is called Healing and High Performance. So it's the intersection between healing modalities, right? Or different exercises that are specifically meant to invite a deeper level of growth and healing, right? On an interpersonal level, while instituting new habits and new high performance habits or patterns of behavior, right? And so we have to have both, right? High performance habits without a deeper degree of healing are always going to be incomplete and insufficient, right? Because you're trying to build on top of the same size foundation. We have to expand the foundation, right? How do we do that when it comes to like interpersonal work, right? We need to invest deeper into our healing, deeper into growth, deeper into our personal development, right? And so, excuse me, meditation is one of those practices because it allows us to disconnect or break free from the mind. So many people's issues don't come down to their emotions. I think emotional resilience is actually overrated. What is not overrated is how we respond in the face of our emotions. When I feel angry, when I feel triggered, do I act from the space of that anger? Do I decide from the space of the trigger? Or do I allow myself to feel and experience the anger? Do I allow myself to fear and experience the trigger, let it pass, and then act from that space? And then make a calm, informed decision. So yeah, we integrate meditation in a really big way. People can achieve equanimity, right? Non-reactivity.
Yeah. And speaking to these individuals, have you noticed a pattern? Have you noticed that a lot of it stems from inner wounds? What are some of the characteristics that a lot of these individuals have that are high performance?
I mean, most high performers are driven to high performance as a means to cope with pain, for sure, right? Because the
Yeah.
achievement that they experience, right, like I mentioned, it's a proxy, right, for acceptance, or in this case, like a lack of acceptance, rejection, or a painful traumatic experience, right? So that's what they're trying to unconsciously solve for, right? Or as I mentioned earlier, claim victory over. The problem is it doesn't work that way, right? You
Yes.
heal the pain in the pain, right? By addressing it. You can't achieve your way around it.
Yeah. And you know what, too, Jake? I think some of the most gratifying and satisfactory and, mind blowing experiences happen outside of the pain once you address it.
Of course.
You mentioned gratitude, and that's a fantastic practice to do every day. The things that you're grateful for, because this is fascinating too, Jake. The odds of you being born is 400 trillion to
It's
1.
crazy.
You have a better chance of winning the lottery 30 times over than you are to actually have a life. Of the billions of sperm and your parents getting together at the time that they
Yeah.
did and how they got together, of all the millions and
Wild.
billions of people on the planet, they were able to conceive us. So we are the two lucky people
Yep.
to be sitting down and having a conversation together. It's pretty fucking mind blowing, if you ask
It
me.
really is.
And we're all on this planet together to grow, to cultivate through our experiences and our hardships and learn the lessons and how we can become better as a human being and what we can do to sort of create an impact and a lasting legacy.
Yep.
That's what I think really propels us towards achieving excellence. It's just not, as you mentioned, extrinsic, but intrinsic, internally,
Right.
and what we are as a human
Yep.
being. I got to say, Jake, I'd love to do a part two with you, mate.
Yeah.
You're a fascinating individual, and I love what you're doing, mate. And I really need to thank you for jumping on the podcast, and also I need to thank Dustin for getting me in contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do
But
it.
Jake, where can people find you, mate? Like if they want to book coaching with
Yep.
you, what do they need to do?
So the best place to interact with me, keep posted or up to date on what I'm doing is my Instagram. I am Jake Kauffman. That's Kauffman. You can also pick up my book on Amazon. As you can imagine, it's Let Love In. The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts by Jacob Kauffman. So my full name, again, that's Kauffman.
Wow, Jake. Jake, fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. Yeah, hopefully down the track we can do a part two. I'd love to sort of dive a little bit deeper into, human emotions and the psychology, which I'm sure you'd probably know a lot about, because these are some of the things that we can address to help propel us into a direction that we want to go in life.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thanks again for having me. This has been an awesome conversation.
Nah, thank you so much, Jake. Speak to you soon.
You too, brother. Take care.